Hi everyone, today's topic is menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is the cyclical changes that occur in the reproductive organs of the primate female mammals is called as what? The menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is nothing but the cyclical changes that occur in the reproductive organs of primate female mammals is called as what? The menstrual cycle. Whereas the cyclical changes that occur in the non-primate female mammals is called as the estrous cycle. So this menstrual cycle in human females, the menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty. So the reproductive cycle in females will begin at the time of the puberty because of the hormones. The hormones which are released by the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary and ovarian hormones are responsible for the beginning of reproductive cycle in the females. So the beginning of reproductive cycle or the menstrual cycle at the time of puberty is called as menarche. So menarche is the first beginning of the first menstrual cycle, but this reproductive cycle will not continue throughout the life. It will ceases after certain age. So usually it will start at the age of 12 to 13 years, menarche, and when she reaches around 45 to 50 years, the reproductive cycle will stop. Okay, so the stoppage of reproductive cycle around the age of, so it begins, the reproductive cycle begins at the age of 12 to 13 years and around 45 to 50 years. When she attains the age of 45 to 50 years, the reproductive cycle will stop. Okay, so the stoppage of reproductive cycle is called as menopause. What it is called? Menopause. Beginning of reproductive cycle is menarche, whereas the end of stoppage of menstrual cycle, the reproductive cycle is called as menopause. Okay, so this menopause occurs around 45 to 50 years of age. So whereas in case of males, the sperm production will occur continuously, it continues throughout their life, but in case of females, the formation of ova ceases after certain age when the reproductive cycle ends. Okay, so the reproductive cycle is because of the hormones released by the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary and ovarian hormones are all responsible for the beginning of the reproductive cycle in the females, and the beginning of reproductive cycle is menarche, whereas the stoppage of reproductive cycle is called as what? The menopause. See, once the girl attains puberty, menstruation begins. So menstruation is the bleeding from the uterus. It is because of the bleeding occurs at intervals of 28 to 29 days. The bleeding occurs in the females once she attains puberty with a regular interval of 28 to 29 days. And what are all the cyclical events that occur from one menstruation till the next menstruation? It is called as what? The menstrual cycle. The duration of menstrual cycle, in females, in normal females is around 28 days. The duration of menstrual cycle in a normal female, is around 28 days. But it is not same in all the females. So that it may varies from 24 to 35 days. That depends upon the duration of the menstrual cycle in girls, that mainly depends upon her mental status, nutrition, stress, anxiety, everything counts. Okay, so depending upon that, so in the normal females, the average duration of menstrual cycle is average 28 days. But It is not same in all the females, it's not same in all the girls, it may vary. In some girls the duration of menstrual cycle may be 24, in some others maybe a duration of menstrual cycle is 30 days, in some others 35, and it may go up to 45 days also. Okay, so but in the normal female the average days of menstrual cycle is 28 days. Okay. See what happens during menstrual cycle? Only one ovum is released. So during every menstrual cycle, one ovum is released from one of the two ovaries, either from a left ovary or from a right ovary. So this menstrual cycle, but you see in males, the production of sperms is continuous. Okay, but whereas in females the oogenesis process, that is the formation of ovum, is a cyclical. Okay, so during each menstrual cycle only one ovum is released from one of the two ovaries, and this menstrual cycle consists of 4 phases. Menstrual cycle consists of 4 phases. Let us discuss the different phases of the menstrual cycle. The first phase is the menstrual phase. The first phase is what? Menstrual phase, or it is also called as a bleeding phase, and the second phase is called as, this is the menstrual phase, and the second phase is called as what? The follicular phase. The second phase is called as what? Follicular phase, or it is also called as proliferative phase. And the third phase is ovulatory phase or ovulation, and the fourth one is the luteal phase. Luteal phase, or it's also called as secretory phase. Secretory phase. See, ovulation. So the phase before the ovulation is considered as the pre-ovulatory phase, and after that is the post-ovulatory phase. Okay, so let us discuss the different phases of menstrual cycle one by one. So what is the first phase of the menstrual cycle? This is the menstrual phase. So menstrual phase is also called as bleeding phase. The duration of menstrual phase is, that is of the first 5 days. The first 5 days of the menstrual cycle is, that is from 1 to 5th day. Okay, the duration of a menstrual cycle is first 5 days. The first 5 days of the menstrual cycle is called as the menstrual phase. So during this phase, what happens? So it is characterized by, the menstrual phase is characterized by the menstrual flow. It is characterized by the menstrual flow or the bleeding. So during this phase what happens? The endometrial lining of the uterus shuts down. Okay, the endometrium layer, which is, that is what, the innermost lining of the uterus, no, so that breaks down, and also so during so menstrual phase is characterized by, so the first phase it is called as what? The menstrual phase. So the menstrual phase is characterized by the menstrual flow or the menstrual bleeding. Okay, so during menstrual phase what happens? The endometrium lining of the uterus ruptures. Okay, the endometrium lining of the uterus break down, and rupturing of the blood vessels. So endometrial lining, and along with the ruptured blood vessels it forms a liquid and come out of the vagina as a menstrual flow. So what causes the breakdown of the endometrial lining of the uterus? It is because of low level of or the withdrawal of progesterone hormone. Progesterone hormone. So what causes the menstrual bleeding? It is because of the low level of progesterone, or the withdrawal of progesterone hormone causes menses. That is what the menstrual bleeding. Okay, so the menstrual bleeding occurs on the first day of the menstrual cycle, and it may continue up to 3 to 5 days. So the first 5 days of the menstrual cycle is called as the menstrual phase. This menstrual phase is characterized by the menstrual flow. Understood? And usually this menstrual flow, during every menstrual cycle, nearly 45 to 100 ml of blood is lost, and it is in the liquid state only. The menstrual flow, the menstrual blood is in the liquid state only. It will not clot usually. So it is because of the presence of fibrinolysin enzyme. So this fibrinolysin enzyme, it prevents the clotting of the menstrual blood. So menstrual blood will not clot because of the presence of fibrinolysin. It is always in the liquid state. Okay, so what happens during the menstrual phase? The endometrium lining breaks down, and rupturing of the blood vessels causes the menstrual bleeding, and it occurs on the first day of the menstrual cycle, and it may continue up to 5 days. So the first 5 days of menstrual cycle is considered as the menstrual phase. Understood? Then the next phase after the menstrual phase, the next phase is called as the follicular phase. So which is the next phase? Follicular phase. It is also called as proliferative phase. Follicular phase, or it is also called as proliferative phase, and it lasts for 6th to 13th day. So during this follicular phase, so many changes occur in the ovaries and as well as the uterus. So what are all the changes that occur in the ovaries is called as ovarian cycle, and what are all the changes that occur in the uterus, that is called as uterine cycle. Okay, so what are all the changes that occur in the ovaries and uterus? It is because of the changes in the level of pituitary and as well as the ovarian hormones. See what happens during follicular phase then. What is happening in the ovary during the follicular phase? So during follicular phase, the level of FSH, so this is showing the levels, that is the hormonal levels of anterior pituitary. So during the proliferative phase or the follicular phase, which will start from 6th day of the menstrual cycle, right, and it will end up to the 13th day, and during this phase the level of FSH and LH hormone secretion increases. So it is because of increase in the secretion of FSH hormone. FSH hormone itself, it is called as follicle stimulating hormone. So what is the function of this follicle stimulating hormone? It is responsible for the growth of ovarian follicles, that already we discussed in our last session, right? Okay, so development of follicles, where the development of follicles will occur? The development of follicles will occur within the cortex region of the ovary, So the primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, and the fully matured follicle, it is called as what? The Graafian follicle, right? So this development of follicles, it is mainly because of the follicle stimulating hormone which is released by the anterior pituitary. So it is because of FSH hormone, the follicles will start developing in the ovary. Okay, see, I said at the time of puberty, the number of follicles left in each ovary 60,000 to 80,000, right? So of the 60,000 to 80,000 follicles, 20 follicles will begin during every menstrual cycle. During each menstrual cycle, nearly 20 follicles will start developing. Okay, but all the follicles will not develop and which will not reach the maturity. Okay, so during this phase, so nearly 20 follicles will begin to develop, will begin to grow, but not all the follicles will reach the maturity. Okay, but only one follicle is able to grow and develop into a matured follicle, fully grown follicle, that is called as what? The Graafian follicle, which undergoes ovulation. So out of 20 follicles, only one follicle is able to grow, right, and develop into a mature Graafian follicle. Remaining all the follicles will degenerate. So the degeneration of follicles is called as what? Follicular atresia. Okay, and the degenerated follicles are called as atretic follicles. So what is the significance of follicular atresia? To limit the number of oocyte released by the ovaries, because during every menstrual cycle, each menstrual cycle, only one ovum is released. Generally, only one ovum is released from either from a right ovary or from a left ovary. Okay. So what is the significance of follicular atresia then? To limit the number of ova released by the ovaries. Okay. So only one dominant follicle will grow and develop into a mature follicle. So it is because of which hormone? FSH hormone. Okay. So the increased FSH hormone causes the development of growth and the development of follicles. Okay, so here all the follicles, remaining follicles degenerate, only one is able to grow. No, so how the follicular development will occur? It is by the accumulation of the granulosa cells. Okay, so initially the primary oocyte gets surrounded by a single layer of granulosa cells, then many number of granulosa cells surround the primary oocyte. So as follicles start developing, the granulosa cells also increasing. So main function of these follicles, the follicles, the developing follicles will release another hormone, that is the granulosa cells of follicles will release the two hormones. One is the estrogen hormone, and another one is inhibin. So these two hormones are released by the granulosa cells of the developing follicles. Okay. Now, so here this is because of FSH, the development of follicles will takes place, and developing follicles will release estrogen and as well as the inhibin. And here inhibin is present now. So once the one of the follicle, when it reaches the maturity, the inhibin hormone so the secreted by the granulosa cells, it will give negative feedback to the anterior pituitary. So it inhibits the secretion of follicular stimulating hormone. So thereby the follicular stimulating FSH hormone level comes down here. Okay. So this is to prevent the growth of further follicles. So other follicles also present in the cortex of the ovary, so that growth of other follicles is prevented by the low level of FSH, right? And on the other hand, the granulosa cells are secreting estrogen also. Okay, so as the number of granulosa cells go on increasing, the secretion of estrogen hormone also increases. Okay, and see, this is the estrogen hormone. So estrogen hormone is secreted by the granulosa cells of the follicles. So as the number of granulosa cells go on increasing, the estrogen secretion also go on increasing, and during the middle of the menstrual cycle, the estrogen level will goes to a peak level. Okay, it reaches its maximum level. So this increased concentration of estrogen it triggers the anterior pituitary to release the LH hormone. So increased estrogen causes the secretion of, it stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete more amount of LH. So due to rapid secretion of LH from the anterior pituitary, the level of LH hormone will goes to a peak level in the middle of the menstrual cycle. Okay. So this increased secretion of LH hormone, it is called as LH surge. What it is called? LH surge. So this LH surge is responsible for the rupturing of Graafian follicle. Understood? So once the Graafian follicle ruptures, the secondary oocyte is released. So what is happening in the ovaries during the follicular phase? So development of it is because of increased secretion of FSH, the development of follicles will begin. Not all the follicles will not mature. Only a selected follicle will grow and develop into a mature follicle because of FSH hormone. Okay, and the developing follicular cells will secrete estrogen, and estrogen level goes to peak during the middle of the menstrual cycle. So this increased concentration of estrogen act on anterior pituitary, it stimulates the anterior pituitary to release LH hormone. So due to the rapid secretion of LH from the anterior pituitary, so it results in the LH surge. That means LH hormone that goes to a peak level during the middle of the menstrual cycle. So that causes the rupturing of the Graafian follicle. Okay, so this is what happening in the ovaries. And what is happening in the uterus here? So these are the uterine events. What is happening in the uterus during the follicular phase? See here, this is the endometrium lining of the uterus, right? So here estrogen hormone is there. It is secreted by the developing follicular cell. Okay, so here the estrogen secreted by the developing follicles causes the thickening of the endometrial lining of the uterus. Okay, so it stimulates the endometrial cells of the uterus to proliferate or to multiply and increase in number. So I already discussed in the last session. So this is the uterus. So the innermost lining of the uterus, it is called as what? The endometrium. Endometrium is having two layers. The basal layer is called as what? The stratum basalis. This is the stratum basalis layer. This is the permanent one. So estrogen released by the developing follicles during the follicular phase will act on the endometrial lining of the uterus and stimulate the cells to proliferate. So it is because of estrogen hormone the cells of stratum basalis will proliferate, will multiply and increase in number, and that results in the formation of one more layer, that is the superficial layer, that is called as a stratum functionalis. That is called as what? The stratum functionalis. So the formation of new layer causes the thickening of the endometrium. Okay, so the thickening of endometrium is because of which hormone? Estrogen hormone. Okay, so what happens in the uterus during the follicular phase? So regeneration of the endometrium which was lost in the menstrual phase. Okay, along with the repair of the broken tissues, repair of the blood vessels, all will occur in the uterus during the follicular phase. Okay, so the follicular phase, what happens in the ovaries during the follicular phase? Development of follicles because of FSH hormone. And what happens in the uterus? The thickening of endometrium and the repair of broken tissues and blood vessels because of estrogen. Okay, so this is what happens during the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. Okay, then the next phase, it is called as what? The ovulatory phase. What happens during the ovulatory phase? Ovulation. So the third phase is the ovulatory phase, the ovulation. So ovulation means what? The release of secondary oocyte from the ruptured Graafian follicle. What causes the rupture of Graafian follicle? I already said the LH surge, the increased secretion of LH hormone during the middle of the menstrual cycle causes the rupturing of the Graafian follicle. It is the LH which induces ovulation. Okay, so increased level of LH hormone causes the rupturing of the Graafian follicle, so that the secondary oocyte which is present in the mature Graafian follicle releases into the pelvic cavity. Okay, so this release of secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle into the pelvic cavity is called as what? Ovulation. So in females, the ovulation, so here I am talking about the 28 days menstrual cycle. Okay, so in a normal female, the average the duration of menstrual cycle is 28 days. So in a normal female, who is having a regular 28-day menstrual cycle, the ovulation will usually occur on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. So ovulation in normal female occurs on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so this applies only to the females having regular 28-day menstrual cycle. Okay, but the ovulation, no, so the ovulation occurs 14 days before the onset of the next menstruation. But ovulation will occur 14 days before the onset of next menstrual cycle. So we can calculate the day of ovulation. See here, suppose if a girl having a 28-day normal menstrual cycle, 28 days. So the day of ovulation can be calculated by the number of days in the cycle and minus 14 days. Okay, so in a regular 28-day menstrual cycle, the number of days in a cycle are 28, right? Minus 14. Okay, then 14th day. So here the ovulation occurs on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle who having regular 28-day menstrual cycle. But duration of menstrual cycle is not same in all the females, no. So it may go up to in some girls the duration of menstrual cycle is 30 days, 32 days and 35 days. Okay, suppose in a 32-day menstrual cycle. Okay. So what is the date of ovulation can be calculated. How it can be calculated? Number of days in a cycle minus 14. So that is 18. Okay. So in a female having 32 days menstrual cycle, 32-day menstrual cycle, the ovulation will occur on the 18th day. So this is how the day of ovulation can be calculated. Okay, so but in a normal 28-day menstrual cycle, usually the ovulation will occur on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. It is because of LH surge. Okay, so this is what the third phase, ovulatory phase. Then after ovulatory phase, the next phase is called as the luteal phase. So the last phase is called as the luteal phase. It's also called as a secretory phase. So the secretory phase or the luteal phase lasts for the 14 days. So it lasts for 14 days and it is fixed. Okay, so what happens during this luteal phase? See here, ovulation happened, right? So ovulation happened on the 14th day of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so after ovulation, what remains? Your ruptured Graafian follicle. Okay, so what is present in the ruptured Graafian follicle? I already discussed, you know about the structure of Graafian follicle, right? Theca interna, granulosa cells and all. Okay, so the theca interna and granulosa cells, they get mixed up and form luteal cells. So the LH, no? The LH stimulate, it causes the ruptured Graafian follicle cells to form a corpus luteum. Okay, so the ruptured Graafian follicle will transform into a corpus luteum because of LH hormone. Okay, so this corpus luteum is maintained by which hormone? LH hormone. So this once the corpus luteum, this is called luteal phase because of the formation of that is corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is a yellow body. So it is yellowish in color because of the presence of which protein? That is lutein protein. Okay. So this corpus luteum is formed from the ruptured Graafian follicle by the influence of LH hormone. So once the corpus luteum forms, it will continue to grow for another 14 days and it acts as endocrine gland. Okay, now it acts as a temporary endocrine gland. So the LH only stimulate the corpus luteum to secrete its hormones. So under the influence of LH hormone, the corpus luteum will secrete 3 hormones. One is the progesterone. It secretes more amount of progesterone and a small amount of estrogen, and it also secretes the inhibin. Okay. So this progesterone secreted by the corpus luteum, it play a very important role in the luteal phase because this progesterone play a very important role in maintaining the endometrium lining of the uterus, which is already thickened by the estrogen. Okay, so what is the function of progesterone hormone here? Maintenance of the endometrial thickness of the endometrial lining of the uterus for the implantation of the fertilized egg and what are all the further events occur in the pregnancy. Okay, so that is what the function of progesterone here. Okay, and here thickening of endometrium will continues in this phase also, because the corpus luteum will also secrete small amount of estrogen. No? So thickening also occurs here. Thickening of endometrium continues here. So this increased concentration of estrogen and progesterone also increases the glandular secretory nature of the endometrium. Okay. And the inhibin hormone what secreted by the corpus luteum, no? So it gives a negative feedback to the anterior pituitary. Okay, so that the FSH hormone will comes down. Okay, the FSH hormone again it will comes down because of the inhibin. Okay, so what is the significance of low level of FSH here? This is because to prevent the growth of the follicles during the luteal phase. So already in the cortex region follicles are present, no? So that growth of the follicles will be regulated, will be prevented by the low level of FSH in the luteal phase. Because in the luteal phase there is no development of follicles. Okay, that is prevented by the low level of FSH. Right. Okay, then so here the corpus luteum will secrete progesterone, no? So the increased secretion of progesterone, it gives a negative feedback to the anterior pituitary, so that the level of LH hormone will comes down. Okay, so once the LH hormone comes down, so LH hormone will also comes down. So if LH hormone comes down, the corpus luteum degenerates. What happens? The corpus luteum will degenerate. So if the corpus luteum is not there, the progesterone and the estrogen hormone will also, the level of estrogen and progesterone also decreases. Okay, so once the progesterone hormone decreases, what happens? The endometrium lining of the uterus, so uterine contraction starts. So once the progesterone decreases, okay, so the decline in the level of progesterone hormone causes the uterine contractions, so that the endometrial lining again it breaks down. Okay, so the rupturing of the endometrium layer will takes place, and the endometrium layer that breaks down, it is because of the reduced secretion of the progesterone. So withdrawal of which hormone causes menstruation? Next menstruation. The next menstruation result is because of the low level of progesterone. Okay, so withdrawal of progesterone causes the menstruation or that is menses. Okay, then the next cycle will begin. Okay, so that is what the menstrual cycle, and what are all the different phases of the menstrual cycle, and what are all the hormones involved in the menstrual cycle. Understood all of you? Okay, so I repeat once again. Menstrual cycle, it is nothing but what? Cyclical changes that occur in the reproductive organs of the primate female mammals. It is a duration of 28 days in a normal female, and it occurs in 4 phases: menstrual phase, follicular phase, luteal phase, and ovulatory phase and the luteal phase. So menstrual phase, the first 5 days of the cycle is menstrual phase. It is characterized by the menstrual flow, and follicular phase is characterized by the development of the ovarian follicles and the thickening of endometrium, the regeneration of the endometrium, repair of the broken tissues and blood vessels takes place during this follicular phase. And in the ovulatory phase causes ovulation, the release of secondary oocyte from the ruptured Graafian follicle. And the luteal phase, the formation of corpus luteum takes place, and that starts secreting the progesterone hormone, which is necessary for maintaining the endometrial lining of the uterus, that is to maintain the pregnancy. And if the pregnancy will not occur, so increase the concentration of progesterone as a negative feedback to anterior pituitary, so that the LH level comes down and the corpus luteum degenerates. So once the corpus luteum degenerates, the hormone progesterone and as well as the estrogen level will comes down. Once the progesterone hormone will comes down, that begins next menstruation. Okay, so the endometrial lining breakdown, that what superficial stratum functionalis layer present, no superficial layer, that again sheds off and come out as a menstrual flow. Okay, so this is what the menstrual cycle. Okay, thank you.